A new line of high-end consoles is on the way, and to me it looks like the big winner is going to be everybody who doesn't even bother. I'm looking at you, Nintendo, and why? Because the Switch is such badass technology? No. The Switch uses a custom version of NVIDIA's Tegra line of so-called systems on a chip, which is a compact and power-efficient way of integrating elements such as the CPU and the GPU neatly inside of a smartphone or tablet computer. Specifically, the Switch uses a custom version of the Tegra X1, which is also used in the NVIDIA Shield and the Google Pixel C. But this is pretty tame technology compared to what Sony and Microsoft are planning. So why do I think Nintendo still has the cutting edge going forward? Is it because of the high quality of its games? Sure, partly. But I really think Nintendo's going to sweep the races because of its highly competitive price. Whenever we look at new consoles and start talking about console wars, we've learned long ago that games are a pivotal concern. Being early or having the best tech has never correlated with success. Ever. But having good games that people actually want to play has always been a decisive parameter. However, just as important as games, though less talked about, is price. If you look at the history of video game consoles since the 80s, 75% of the time it's the cheapest console that ends up going the distance. In 1982, the ColecoVision ended up besting the new Atari 5200 and the technologically impressive Vectrex, largely on price alone, though that Donkey Kong port didn't hurt things. In the late 80s and early 90s, the Genesis and Super Nintendo reigned supreme over high-end consoles that had what were earth-shattering tech specs at the time. The TurboGrafx-16 might have had a chance too, had it not been marketed alongside a $400 CD attachment that vastly increased the console's perceived final price tag in the minds of consumers. The mid-90s confirms this as well. The Sony PlayStation famously trumped the early launch of the $400 Sega Saturn practically on price alone. The 3DO at $700 never even mattered, and the low-priced N64 hung in there and ultimately succeeded despite the widespread popular impression that it was outmoded technology oriented toward a very young demographic. The PlayStation 2 and Xbox ruled the early 2000s, but the incredibly popular Wii at a mere $250 launch price mopped the floor with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. This time in spite of the fact that many people saw it as a novelty toy for the elderly and babies. Then the Wii U came out and it was a huge failure. But then came the cheap and relatively portable Nintendo Switch, which has helped Nintendo reassert itself in the marketplace. And Sony has also done pretty good in the same time period, having learned from their past mistakes with the PlayStation 3. But what about the future? The next generation's souped-up PlayStation 5 is rumored to cost $800 a unit. How much will Sony have to eat of that cost to make the console affordable to consumers? Many speculate the actual retail price will be somewhere around $500. But is that going to be viable up against the impressive Switch library, which can now be accessed for as low as $200? Tech specs used to matter a ton back in the day. The move from 8-bit to 16-bit seemed like a revolution. The move from 2D to 3D in the mid-90s was even grander. But since the days of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, improvements from one generation of console to the next have really mattered less and less. Breath of the Wild was a game developed for 2012's Wii U, and yet it sold like gangbusters more than half a decade later on the Switch, which itself is arguably nothing more than a middle-of-the-road tablet computer. Big companies constantly think they need to push the envelope in order to grab consumers' attention. But with increasingly thin diminishing returns in the world of technological innovation, it sure seems like that strategy is no longer viable. At $800 or even $500, one might start to ask themselves the obvious question: why don't I just get a PC? Nintendo at its relatively low price point is going to be fine. They're gonna continue to deliver great games and provide a tantalizing point of access for up-and-coming indie developers looking to make a name for themselves, beyond the PC. Sony and Xbox, on the other hand, seem to be getting closer and closer into just blurring into the PC market altogether. The question I have is, does that mean that there might be room for other consoles to enter into the fray and compete with Nintendo in that $200 to $300 price range? If the PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox are just PCs dedicated to gaming, well then really the Switch is just a tablet computer that's dedicated to gaming, and that's technology that's easily replicatable for a lot of companies. All they would really need to get things going is a wide assortment of original games and unique IPs. I'm looking at you, Sega! Are you gonna do this? Am I gonna wake up one day and find out that the Sega Genesis Mini was just a test run for getting back into the console race? Are we gonna see Shinobi 4, Phantasy Star 5, Shining Force, Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, Alex Kidd, or perhaps a new entry in the Virtua Fighter or Panzer Dragoon series? On a new console? Could this explain why Sega has held back from touching any of these beloved franchises for years, opting instead to make 100 entries in the Yakuza series and more bad 3D Sonic games? Are Sonic Adventure 3 and Skies of Arcadia 2 finally in the works as we speak? It could happen, but probably not. Sega's not going to be able to make the kind of dream games that I would want fast enough to matter. In fact, probably right now they have 90% of their staff making the next Yakuza game. In the meantime, what do you think? If the PlayStation 5 and new Xbox are going to be as expensive as they look like they're going to be, do you think Nintendo's going to sweep the new console war? Will there even be a console war? After all, victory in these things tends to go to the company with the better exclusive games and the lower price point, and Nintendo has a definitive lock on both of those categories. Finally, what do you think of the idea that maybe Sega could once again rise from the ashes and compete against Nintendo with their own glorified smartphone technology?
Only time will tell.
Thanks for watching. Bye.